Hello and welcome to this week's installment of our video blog. I'm Michles Michles, joined today by a very special guest, Sheriff Ashley from Okaloosa County. Hey, welcome.
Good to be here.
Thanks for taking so much of your valuable time, not only to come this morning, but just to get over here. I know you got a ton of things going on.
We do, but this is worthwhile, just being able to communicate with the citizens. And appreciate you letting us be here.
No, it's great. And we were talking off the camera before we got on. There are so many issues that I like to think of myself as paying attention, but you can't pay attention to everything. And some of the stuff that you're having to fight and deal with, and the increase in crime, some of the percentages you said to me a moment ago are shocking.
They are. Relative
to your budget and your allocation of manpower. I think really we ought to start by getting that information out.
Well, Okaloosa County, we're celebrating our 100th birthday this year, and we have one of the lowest per capita costs in the country as far as how much it costs each citizen for law enforcement. And people, that aren't budget savvy say, well, how do you determine what your per capita is? And basically, you take your budget and divide it by the number of people in your community that you serve. So we have one of the lowest per capita. We have one of the lowest officer per thousand ratios, not just in Florida, but in the country.
It's amazing.
And from 2009 to 2012, we had about a 92% increase in violent crime. And that's while the rest of the state's enjoying a 41-year low. And so those are really challenging times when they're cutting your budget during those spikes in population, spikes in calls for service went up 31%. Conversely, the tourist population goes up 31%.
And you brought in some new military personnel. We talked about that.
Our permanent population grows for about 5%. So all those challenges, if we were doing less work, crime rates going down, you could see budget cuts. When all those things are going in the reverse, certainly insurance didn't decrease. At the time, fuel was not decreasing, it was increasing. And so pensions, you have all these things that are mandated by the state. So it's not like, well, I'm not going to do that this year, I don't have to pay for that. So what we have is a fleet that's been decimated. And at some point it will be not roadworthy. And so unless you're replacing 40, 50 cars a year, if you're not replacing any, at some point they fail. Your maintenance costs go up. I mean, the issues are endless.
So let's assume that we work out the financial details and we get you the money that you need to do your job, which is a big assumption given all the defense that's being played against, and really just all the rivalry between municipal entities and funding. It's nobody wants to raise taxes. We've talked about it. We're conservatives. We're not going to raise taxes, but you got to get revenue somewhere. So let's assume that we solve that riddle. Let's talk about spending that money a little bit. Talk about some of these camera options, and it's in the news now about putting cameras on your officers and getting that out on the street. How's that going to happen?
Well, we did it by basically we had our in-car cameras that we were funding in our IT budget, and so with those cameras were really expensive. They're a little antiquated in today's technology, and it doesn't take many years to become antiquated in technology.
It happens almost overnight, doesn't it?
It happens very quick. And we had a 43% failure rate in our in-car cameras, and they cost nearly $6,000 each. So not replacing those cameras and using those funds towards body cams, which are about $200 to $300 each.
So you're cannibalizing your old IT stuff, your old
Yes.
cameras, converting that into a lesser expensive
system, and probably a more, I wouldn't say accurate system, but certainly a better system.
Let's talk philosophically for a second. As I read it as an outsider, it looks like most law enforcement agencies are coming on board. They think it's going to protect their officers. It's going to give a more fair and balanced viewpoint for the public. You guys are always guilty until proven innocent. I find that ironic as a lawyer. The law enforcement officer is always guilty of perpetuating these things or causing these problems and not de-escalating it or not solving the problem. You guys are guilty until proven innocent. A lot of times the criminal has got the reverse standard. But from your perspective, these cameras are going to be a fairness issue, I imagine. They're going to present more real-time information and a better perspective on what exactly happened during these encounters.
You're absolutely right. Right now we are dependent on somebody capturing a portion of what happened on a smartphone, or somebody just happens to be by with a camera and they capture a portion of what happens, and then it's on the 6 o'clock news, and then it's on the national media. And we've almost abdicated as a society of determining innocence or guilt in a courtroom or with a jury of our peers, and we've given that to the media and the mob. And so if we're headed that way, which it appears we're already there, if we are going to abdicate that responsibility and give it to the media and the mob, we want to have our officers protected with the whole thing that happened. So the totality of the circumstances that created the environment, that created the reactions, and if we have that, we feel like that we can show citizens the law enforcement officer is the person that is enforcing the law that you've asked them to. You know, if we don't want a law enforced, you know, what's the alternative? If an individual has a warrant for their arrest, you know, the current law is that by any means necessary, using force even on this use of force matrix. So what is the alternative if we are not going to do that? If we're not going to enforce the law?
And we were talking, and I think it's at least it's interesting to me. I'm not a criminal lawyer, so I don't deal with this daily. But the privacy issues are interesting to me. You've got law enforcement officers that'll be wearing cameras. Obviously, when they make an encounter on the street or they're apprehending somebody or serving a warrant, they've got certain rights and certain obligations. But it gets a little grayer, doesn't it, when they're in schools, in an individual's home, maybe in a hospital setting where there are privacy rights of others that are at stake. Certainly you have a right of privacy in your home under certain circumstances. Some of these privacy issues have got to be determined legally in order to set the parameters for you guys, don't they?
And you bring a great point. You know, after Ferguson, you saw the riots, and then they continued in New York. And so we get this scream, we need to have body cameras so that we can know as a society what our law enforcement officers are doing in our name. How are they representing us? We want to be able to grade them on that. And so it's contrary to what we've been saying in the state legislature. You know, we don't want drones flying over us. We don't want automatic car tag readers. We don't want cameras on the roads, even though we just spent billions. There's actually a bill right now, House Bill 571, that would do away with body cameras, that would do away with automatic car tag readers, that would do away with any surveillance whatsoever of citizens. But they've already spent billions as a state on this very thing. So it's contradictory in its very nature. But back to the privacy issue. Our current policy is that if a law enforcement officer has a legal right to be there, even at your home. You call for a domestic violence issue or disturbing. If an officer has a right to be there, they're going to record. Now, does that make it a public record or not? That's what we're going to have to let the courts to determine. Right now, almost anything a law enforcement officer does or an agency produces becomes a public record at some point. How are those going to be used? A lot of people don't like the mug shots that are in the local convenience stores where, you know, the teacher that was arrested for DUI or whatever the situation is. Why are you putting their picture in the paper? They've not been convicted of anything. And I think even Representative Gates has tried to pass a bill, or at least will be introducing a bill, that unless you're convicted, your mug shot's not a public record. The legislators got to catch up on what is private and what is public.
And that's going to be a fight that's going to take some time to sort out, because that's a pretty gray area.
It is a gray area, and we'll let the courts determine a lot of it. If we as a law enforcement agency do not believe something is of criminal nature or of evidentiary value, then we're going to say, no, we're not going to release this. Courts, give us a court order if you believe it is. And let the courts and legal minds decide, is this a public record or isn't?
Which, as a lawyer, I got to tell you, doesn't bring great confidence to me, because these things get harder and harder. They don't get easier. They become more time consuming. There are the resources necessary to resolve them. They get more and more complex. You'll have entities like the ACLU weighing in. You'll have minority interest groups weighing in. You'll have an awful lot of clutter and a lot of self-proliferating lawyering, I predict.
I predict it as well, but we've got to do something to protect not only law enforcement, but our citizens from these biased claims. And I say biased claims, and I was speaking to you earlier about watching this thing on Facebook where they've already convicted these officers in the shooting.
In LA.
In LA,
yeah.
And I saw exactly opposite of what that person's perspective was on that camera. What I heard and what I saw was a justified shooting, but it doesn't matter. So we were talking about, does the camera matter or not?
Yeah.
And only so are we fighting this public opinion battle?
Absolutely. And you know, you can have 3 people watch the same video. You can have 3 people see the same event with their own eyes, or get 3 different versions and 3 different outcomes. So it's not the solution to every one of these disputes, particularly when you bring in public cynicism. I mean, I feel for you guys because there is a tremendous bias out there, and it's not just media bias. It's the public is biased. There's a trust issue. They look at these videos and they say we are too heavy-handed. Things are escalating too quickly, and before you know it, it's out of control, and you're the responsible entity.
And I agree with everything except I believe the bias is media driven, and it may not be just media bias, but when the public never sees anything good, the only thing that's being presented to them is something bad. The media goes across the country looking for something bad. That's what sells.
Do you include social media as media? Because see, that's citizen. That I see it as citizen driven, and I love the story that you told, where if you announce at a school that there's going to be a singing contest in the front of the school and a fight in the back of the school, everyone's going to the back of the school to watch, and that may be media conditioned, but now that it is conditioned, it's ingrained into our culture almost.
It is. We'd much rather. I think we thrive on conflict and drama. Certainly, the media sells conflict and drama. If you think really about what the media, they compile a lot of public data, whether it's arrest records or traffic crashes, or they compile a lot of it and they turn around and sell it to us, and we buy it. And so it's as a society, I agree that we if it bleeds, it leads. I mean, that's been around forever. People want to see the drama,
Right.
But how we react to it, crack addicts want crack, and just because they want crack doesn't mean it's right to give it to them.
Right.
And the media has some ethical responsibility on governing themselves. Everything in our country is not bad. Let's present some of the good things, most of which are happening.
Let's talk about someplace that I think this is going to get to, and you probably will agree at some point. We might disagree on the timing of it, but it's going to get to ultimately the conspiracy theorists, and they're going to be like, well, your camera didn't work because you destroyed the evidence, or they didn't have that wasn't saved long enough. The IT department had a hiccup and it got deleted or something. That's coming. Right?
That's coming.
And when that comes, how do you answer to that? There's going to definitely be that time where the video is not available. We're going to come to believe that it's always available. In my profession, people think everything is CSI Miami. It's like, well, why didn't you?
Overnight.
Yeah, well, why didn't you solve that? I mean, you just get the satellite imagery and you do these tests and it's done. The forensics are over, but it's coming, right?
It is, and I've always fallen back on the truth. If an officer forgets to turn on his camera for whatever reason, then he forgot to turn on his camera. We've actually made it part of our physical ability training. We have one of those where you have to pass this test twice a year. And so if you're not physically fit, well, part of that is you get the description of the call made to you before you even start the exam, the physical fitness exam. And you have to point out the individual that was given to you after you've had all this exertion and exercise, about halfway during the course. You have to point out the right person. So you have to have remembered it, not forgotten it during your excitement. And it will be the same here. It'll be part of our training that if you're in a lawful place where you have a lawful right to be and you're taking enforcement action, you should turn on your body cam. And some of those won't be public record, though. If we're interviewing a child sex abuse victim, we're going to record that. But it's not going to be a public record.
Right.
If we're at a hospital and we're recording the victim in the hospital for whatever condition we're going to record that. It's not going to be a public record. Courtrooms, what was the other schools? There's a federal law where we don't release that video footage of children. We're going to record it if we're taking law enforcement action for a whole number of reasons, liability being one of those, complaints, being able to prove that we're doing what the citizens are asking us to do. Mm-hmm. And so there may need to be some law changes, civil citations. I just had this discussion yesterday or Saturday. Basically you have bureaucrats that are saying, usurping the authority of the legislative branch and usurping the discretionary authority of the judicial branch by saying, mailbox smashing is no longer illegal. According to civil citation, it's just an administration infraction. All under the concept that we're going to lower minority contacts with law enforcement, and all under the concept that first-time misdemeanors go to jail, and we're trying to lower recidivism rates. That's just not true. First-time misdemeanors don't go to jail. I mean, there's a lot of discretion and alternative programs that if an officer finds a juvenile that's tagging the side of a school with graffiti, the first time they usually call mom or dad or guardian, and we set up a weekend where the child can come fix what he's destroyed. Now, if it's the 10th time and he's part of a gang and he's marking off territory for his gang members, that's another issue. But that discretion has been left with law enforcement and judicial branch, and the legislative branch makes laws on our behalf. We consent to that. If we're saying, legislative branch, you're saying that this is a misdemeanor crime, DJJ is saying, no, it's no longer a misdemeanor crime, it's an administrative infraction, they don't have to answer to anybody. The representatives have to answer to people. So I think you're usurping the authority of the legislative branch and the discretionary authority of the judicial branch when these bureaucrats decide what's right and wrong anymore. Certainly may be in the benefit of the child, but we need to do it through the process.
Well, and the benefit of the community.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because what we forget about a lot of times, I think, in criminal justice system is the victim. We forget about them quite frequently, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, a pretty complex mess.
It is indeed.
It's a good thing we got folks like you out there working through that.
Well, there's an old Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times, and
Right.
I think we're certainly there.
Well, I greatly appreciate you taking the time to come down today. You got a lot of things to do, and this isn't really the highest priority, but I really appreciate you coming by.
Thank you for letting me air that.
And if there's any time that we can get an issue out and raise awareness, just give us a holler, and we'll be happy to do that.
Thank you very much.
Okay.